Hi guys, welcome back aboard our 44-foot hurricane damaged DIY catamaran project boat. We're hopefully only a few weeks away from splashing this big hunk of fiberglass and motoring it 900 miles up the ICW to North Carolina. We still have a lot of stuff on the to-do list. Right now we don't have a DC system aboard the boat. We'll need that for our nav lights, we'll need that for charging our handheld VHF, and also for starting the engines. And speaking of the two engines, they are currently not connected to either diesel or raw water for coolant. So we have a lot of stuff on the to-do list, but let's start with the DC stuff. We're gonna have a very simple DC system. For one, there's not that much stuff we actually need to power, and also all of this stuff is gonna have to come back out of the boat once we're in North Carolina. So I'm gonna be installing most of the components on this piece of plywood. On my little drawing here, I have noted the gauge of cable we're going to be using for different things, and also how we're going to be fusing everything. And when I say everything, that might be a bit of an overstatement because there's not that much stuff, right? There's the DC panel that's going to be powering our USB charger here and our nav lights. That's going to be it for that guy. And then other than that, all we're going to be hooking up is this Orion DC-DC charger so we can charge our windlass battery from our starter battery. Even though our system is going to be super simple, I've still gone ahead and just figured out how much each of our things are drawing in terms of amps, and then I've sized the wiring according to that, and then we're going to be fusing according to that. If you don't have access to the ABYC standard, you can still find the ampacity chart here, for instance, on Blue Sea's website. This chart here will show you how many amps you can fuse a given gauge wire at. Be aware that there is a column here for a single conductor in free air, then there's up to 3 conductors in sheath or conduit or bundle. That's important to know. Something else to be aware of is the fact that just because you're following the ampacity chart doesn't mean that your installation is going to be ABYC compliant. There are other things and rules you need to be aware of. Like, for instance, there's this odd little rule that you can't have more than 4 ring terminals on a stud. So yeah, just be aware of that. We're going to be connecting to the starter on the engine also. I don't know how much that draws, but I've looked up the recommendations from Yanmar. We're going to have a combined run of less than 2 meters for both the positive and the negative conductor. So less than 2 meters, that would put us in 30 square millimeters. Of course, that doesn't help us much here in French fry country where everything is weird units. Like, for instance, the cable is in American wire gauge, which are these odd numbers. I googled and found a random cross-reference American wire gauge to square millimeters here on the internet. As you can see, the American wire gauge, the numbers go smaller as the cable grows bigger, as we can see here by the square millimeters. Note that I say this with a bit of a smile, because as with so many other measuring units here in the US, the American wire gauge makes 0 sense. And of course, by other units that don't make sense, I'm referring to Fahrenheit and also the whole fractions of inches thing. From what I have heard, the story behind the American wire gauge stems from way back in the day when they would draw copper through dies to get it down to smaller and smaller gauges of cable, which is why 16 in this case is a smaller gauge wire than this 4 gauge. That is, I mean, not as logical as the square millimeters, but it does make sense. Right up until you started having stuff that actually consumed more juice than you can get through a 1 gauge. Because what happens then? Then we get down into the odd things. Like, for instance, this guy here, which is a 2/0 cable. Which, of course, is a much smaller cross diameter than a 2 gauge cable. Anywho, that was a fun little detour. Let's get back to the DC system. We're not looking for a museum quality installation here. We're just looking for something that can get us to North Carolina. So we have 2 power bars. We have one over here with the red doodads. That's going to be the positive. And then this guy is going to be the negative, or ground. These funky looking angular things here are called MRBFs. They are a super convenient way to fuse something. You can do it directly off of the terminal on your battery. They use these little square looking things here. That's the actual fuse. It just slides on there and then you put the ring terminal on top. The funky little square fuses here, you can get those in all kinds of sizes. This one here is a 30, but down here we've got 2 300s. one of these for each of the two starters on the engines. Fusing the connection to the starter is actually not something you're required to do in the ABYC standard, which is also why we can get away with using a 300 amp fuse on the 2/0 cable, because that is way higher than that's supposed to be fused. If you're going to be fusing something and you're not going to be using one of the MRBFs, then you could use something like this ANL fuse here, which I picked this up just to make that point that there's different ways of doing this. This is what we'll use for the windlass battery. As I'm sure you can imagine, there are a ton of scenarios where it's just a lot more convenient to have one of the MRBFs compared to an ANL fuse. Through a little bit of YouTube magic, our plywood arrangement is now done. We can go ahead and get this installed in the boat. I can't hook up the engines today because we've run out of cable lug doohickeys for 2 gauge. Long term, most of these components aren't going to be located here, but for getting us to North Carolina, this will work just fine. From the DC-DC battery charger, I need to run 4 gauge wire forward to the windlass battery. Having a separate battery for a power-hungry windlass is a very common solution, and with the high-quality battery charger, we make sure that the windlass battery lasts as long as possible. Eventually, all of this wiring will be much nicer, but for now, we just need something that can get us to North Carolina in a safe and reliable manner. A few weeks back, I 3D printed this surface mount box for our distribution panel. I did that to allow us to mount the panel without having to cut a giant hole in the bulkhead. For the fun of it, I used some glow-in-the-dark filament. We used our phones for navigation quite a bit on our last trip up the ICW. The same is probably going to be true for the catamaran, so some kind of USB charger in the cockpit would be super nice. This is a watertight version from Scanstrut. We have the exact same one aboard Athena, and we've had 0 issues with it. With all the connections made to the distribution panel, all that was left was to secure it to the box and then, of course, play with the breakers. Of course, none of this is going to work without getting the batteries connected. I like the classic style of crimping tool over the hydraulic ones. Your mileage may vary, that is just my personal preference. I do wish I had something a little bit less aggressive for shrinking heat shrink. If you have a recommendation for a product, please go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. With everything connected, it was time to play a fun game of who the heck balled this ball of mess up and put it back in the box. And that is it for our very basic DC system. I mean, the DC system in the porthole is going to be a little bit more basic than this, but yeah, this should power everything we need on the trip to North Carolina. We have the bilge pump in the starboard hull, the distribution panel up on the bulkhead, and the Nmea 2000 network. For our Nmea 2000 network, I've got a little DC-DC converter just to make sure that the Nmea 2000 network gets a nice steady 12 volts, just to avoid any kind of issues. But we'll get back to that once we start hooking up all of our Nmea 2000 stuff. This does look a little bit messy, and for our final electrical system, of course, I'm going to spend way more time planning how to lay it out so it looks nice. The DC components here is all stuff that we can reuse in a few years when we actually go to wire the DC system. So that's why I didn't mind getting the good stuff now, the Blue Sea stuff and the Victron stuff. Before we move on to the next step here in the starboard hull, which is connecting a bunch of hoses to the engine, the diesel tank, the exhaust, all that stuff, then I'd like to just get this Orion XS DC-DC charger up and running. Of course, there is the obligatory firmware update before we can do anything. Right now, all I have to charge our starter battery and the windlass battery is just this puny little cheap non-configurable 2 amp charger. I've ordered a better one that should show up in a few days because charging those two batteries with 25 watts is going to take just about forever. Once we're underway and actually running the engine, of course, the alternator is going to be charging those two batteries, but it's always nice to have a good quality battery charger laying around. Now, of course, before we can run the engine, there's a bunch of plumbing we need to hook up. For a brief second, I thought it was going to be a no detours kind of day. Alas, that was not the case. This used to be a little hose barb through hole for a vented lube. Now this one is damaged beyond repair, so we need to remove it, but the knot on the inside is covered in epoxy. Luckily, it's nothing Mr. Angle Grinder can't fix. The new plastic through-hole that came with the vented lube is much smaller than the old through-hole, so a quick stop at Mr. 3D printer was required to procure a custom-designed little adapter doohickey. This is yet another temporary fix. This part of the interior was rebuilt by the previous owner, Brian, so we're missing all the old holes for plumbing and wiring. When I replaced the vented loop in the porthole, I found this really spiffy metal version. This is something we might consider long term, but for now we're sticking with the bog standard plastic version. Ta-da! One fully assembled vented loop complete with a connection to the vent on our dripless shaft seal. The vented loop comes with these little plastic clippy thingies. I don't trust them. A good quality stainless hose clamp seems worth it. And speaking of hose clamps, after having connected the vented loop to the engine, that was the end of the first 10 pack of hose clamps, at a cost of roughly $45. Next followed the raw water strainer and the spiffy Raycor fuel filter. We have the exact same fuel filter aboard Athena, and it's been awesome. Before reusing the old fuel hose to get diesel into the diesel tank, we ran Mr. Scope camera down through it just to make sure there wasn't any nasty stuff in there from when the boat sank. There wasn't, so we could go ahead and reuse the old hose and save a little bit of money. I hate using oversized hose clamps for several reasons. There's a long pokey metal bit poking out, and also there's a lot of tightening required. But unfortunately, Captain Dum Dum had ordered the wrong size, leaving me with no choice. I finished 99% of the plumbing yesterday. Unfortunately, I was not able to finish hooking up the exhaust because I dropped our brand new Vetus muffler here and this little vent doohickey broke off. That unfortunate accident has now turned this thing into a $250 paperweight. This is quite possibly Captain Dum Dum's greatest hit so far in 2025. This is such a boneheaded way to just waste $250. But yeah, I have ordered a new muffler. Hopefully that'll get here next week so we can finish the plumbing. Next up on our to-do list is something I have definitely not been looking forward to. These are the new wiring harnesses for our two engines and also the push-pull controls for the engines. And why have I not been looking forward to this? Well, because I think running the wiring harness and also the push-pull cable to the port engine is going to be a right pain in the behind. Luckily, I have my little expert here to help me. In the cockpit, we have the push-pull controls and the engine control panels installed, but they're not yet hooked up to anything. We decided to start with the starboard engine for the sole reason that it's going to be the easiest one. The helm is located right above the starboard aft cabin with a super short run to the engine. A quick little sanity check revealed that the new cables are a little bit longer than the old ones. That is fine. It would have been much more of an issue if it was the other way around. This is such a super short run and there's plenty of room in there, so we decided to try and get everything through in one pull. Both the push-pull cables and the wiring harness complete with the bulky Deutsch connectors still attached.
Yep.
After connecting the wiring harness, there was just the small matter of the two cables. The throttle cable was super straightforward, but it turned out Captain Dum Dum had ordered the wrong size securing doohickey for the gearbox cable. Luckily, with a quick stop at the workshop and a few minutes of cleanup, we were able to reuse some of the old securing doohickeys from the old push-pull controls. That left us with the new shiny stainless ones for the engines. Getting the cables and the wiring harness to the port engine was going to be way more difficult. I figured out we could zip tie the new cables to the old ones and pull them through one at a time. It's not that access is super horrible. With the panels removed from this locker in the port aft cabin, we could get access to the cables, but there was just a lot more bends and a bunch of old wiring in the way. This time around, I did decide to remove the connectors from the wiring harness just to give us a slightly better chance. After about an hour of messing around and a couple of minor setbacks, we were done. I connected the port cables to the engine and both of the wiring harnesses to the control panels. That was it for the indoor part of today's adventure. On our way to North Carolina, we'll need some kind of shade in the cockpit. To go along with the Beverly Hills Hillbillies theme, we're going to use our trusty Ultra Cheapo blue canopy. We'll shorten one leg to make it look a little bit nicer, but for now, it's nice just to be out of the sun. Connecting the cables to our super spiffy Cobalt push-pull controls was super easy. So easy, in fact, I decided to do it twice. I definitely didn't do it twice because I forgot to add this stupid little spacer doohickey.
Throw it in the garbage. Throw it in the garbage.
Despite that little oopsie-daisy, we now have both of the engines completely hooked up. We also have a working DC system, and we have 99% of the engine plumbing installed, with the exception of that little exhaust issue. In a rare instance of good luck, it turns out we might possibly be able to get liability insurance without having a completely finished survey. We're waiting for confirmation on that, but if that turns out to be true, then that is the last big known hurdle for us to splash the catamaran. Now, there are a ton of little other smaller things we need to get done also. There are so many that it's hard for us to just keep them straight in our heads, and also to help visualize progress for you guys, we're going back to the board. These are some of last week's tasks, like through hulls, anti-fouling, fire extinguishers, escape hatch, and diesel tanks. Ava has prepared new post-its. But apparently now that the sheriff is back in town, my old board, no longer good enough. Had to be redone.
Now they're gonna scrutinize this one. As you can see, people, we have expanded the to-do side because there's a lot to do. Then we have a doing. We always forget to move the sticky notes into the doing, if anybody's noticed.
That is a classic mistake.
And then done, those are also not going to be moved until we're completely done. The boat's ready to go in the water. So let's get to it. I've created a bit of a system. We have
gold plating. What?
Wow.
Go ahead.
Yes. We have engine and electrical. Can you hold that for me,
Yeah.
please? Thank you. We have things inside the boat that need to get done. We have things like deck, like topside, that needs to get done. And things, I don't want to say below the water line, but sides and under the boat that need to get done.
Very good. We have a system.
Yep.
Okay, so let's reframe.
Okay. All right. So rapid fire. We have install engine and exhaust. Install engine exhaust temp alarm. Hurry up! Change hose.
Tape boys getting behind here.
We have to change the hose, the for the starboard engine.
Yes, that's there's a little loop there where the water heater coil is supposed to get heat from, and we just have that loop back to the engine right now. We just want to make sure we use a hose there that's good for heat. That was that one? No.
Nope, that's check for strip studs.
Yeah, we have the starter on the port engine might have a strip stud on the starter, but we'll check that.
Secure the windlass and starter batteries.
Yes, because right now they're just flopping in the breeze. We can't have that.
And these are, well, basic Nmea 2000 network.
Yes, we'll use the Nmea 2000 network for monitoring tank levels and also for the engine exhaust alarm for, we'll get back to that. That's going to be really awesome.
Yeah, and these are right before we go, change oil, engine oil.
Yep, because Captain Dum-Dum might have put the wrong engine oil in the engines because I'm used to cold weather and apparently Florida is too hot for cold weather, so yeah.
The next category is the hulls, things that need to happen on the bottom outside of the boat. So we have to install the depth sounder.
Yes, so yeah, we have the one we need to put in the starboard hull. That's just sliding it in. We also have a depth sounder for the port hull, and that's one that needs to get installed on the inside. It's not a through hull one, so that's a little bit more involved.
Yeah. Seal and lock all through holes.
Yep, just so we make sure we don't frickin' sink when we go in the water.
Oh my gosh. Fix the hole under the keel, also important for not...
Yes, we have a drain hole in the starboard keel. We just need to glass that, not a big deal.
We have to align the rudders.
Yep, I just noticed that one of the rudders is slightly out when we have them supposedly at center, so we'll fix that.
Yeah. The last of the anti-fouling, we just have a few spots that we couldn't get to because of our chemical trailer, and also under the rudders we have to get those spots.
Yes, and under the keels for that area we're going to repair.
Yeah.
Install props, which is they're freaking expensive, so we're installing those as the very last thing.
Yeah. Next is our category of things on top of the deck. You'll see, it'll make sense. Like the chain and anchor that's coming this week from next week from Mantis.
Yep, the awesome folks at Mantis.
Very excited about that. We have to secure our AC unit.
Yep, right now the outdoor doodad for the AC is just kind of sitting on the deck. That's probably not good.
Yep. We have to get some lines, which we may have some left over from, I don't know if they were Brian's or from the original owners, but we're going to see if we can reuse some of those. And
those lines are mooring lines.
Yes, exactly. And we need to get fenders.
Yes, which are surprisingly expensive.
Yes, so that's been a little hard to pull the trigger on which ones to get.
Yeah.
All right. The next category are things inside of the boat for living. Like, for instance...
living or surviving,
yeah,
so Eva might classify it.
Exactly. This will be a twofer. It's shower plumbing and shower solution. So we have to plumb the shower and exactly figure out how we're going to shower.
Yeah. Two challenges. We don't have pressurized water and we don't have a water heater, so it'll be fun.
And a challenge that one of us is more concerned about than the other.
Yeah. You'll never guess which one it is.
This next one was also one that one of us was more concerned about than the other, and that is the toilet. We have to install the toilet.
See, my suggestion was a bucket. Trusty old bucket.
With a noodle.
Well, yeah, maybe like a luxury model, but...
I didn't mention a luxury noodle.
But now we're installing a Raritan Marine Elegance, the exact same head we have aboard Athena. It's been freaking awesome. We've had 0 issues with it, so we'll install one of those.
Mm-hmm. Next, we're going to build a bed.
Yep, which is coming up early next week.
Yep. And freezer. We need to get a freezer.
Yeah, we're going to use the fridge from the tool trailer. It's not that big, so to have enough food for a week or so, I think we'll need a freezer just to not starve to death. Mm-hmm. This might look like a lot of work, and it is going to be a lot of work, but some of them are quick, some of them are a little bit more involved. We are hoping to be ready to splash in the next week and a half or 2 weeks.
Yeah, we are really hoping so, but of course there are some things that are out of our control, like when the owner of the yard can move the boat, and we also have to hire a crane, so when they're available too, so Fingers crossed.
We haven't even started working on our board yet, and we've already realized that there's a task we forgot to put on there. That's to get rid of our mountain of trash. But hopefully we can get to that next week. And that's going to be the end of this week's video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video,
please remember to leave a like.
See you.
Did you know that's where I'd be?
I think everybody knew.